Well, of course, red alert, China in charge, just one of the many security issues that we have to worry about in this country and around the world. But do we take security seriously enough? I've argued for a long time that we don't. Just look at the outrage caused by CSIS Director Richard Fadden when he said that there are people in this country who are under the influence of foreign governments. There were cries of racism, an absolutely silly charge when dealing with serious questions such as espionage. So there is a conference going on in Ottawa right now on national security, cross-border security. I want to bring in Joseph Humire. He's with the Center for a Secure, Free Society.
Correct.
There we go. Right. So your area of expertise is cross-border security, national security, correct?
Correct.
When you look at how Canada deals with these issues, and you've briefed politicians, you've talked to people on both sides of the border, does the general public have a clue how dangerous the world really can be and how these are serious issues we need to consider?
Well, thank you, Brian, for having me on your show. And I say the generally never really has the full picture. There's a lot of things that go on in the intelligence community. We talk about how our successes are known, our failures are known, our successes are not. And that's generally the mantra. So there's a lot of things that are going on that the general public is not sure about. I think a lot of things happen on the border, particularly the border between Mexico and the United States, that the general public's not aware. Local law enforcement usually tends to have the jump on it. They tend to find out, they're on the ground, they see the action. And of course, on a northern border, I mean, just this last month, there was a Hezbollah leader arrested in Merida, Mexico, that actually was from the Bay Area. He was from San Francisco, had been invited to the University of Berkeley to give conferences. I mean, he was a kind of a well-known scholar in his field in Islamic studies, was arrested for trafficking Hezbollah cells throughout the Tijuana through the border. And that was a complete shock to the general public, but not to those that have been paying attention to the issue, and obviously not to law enforcement, which interrupted this cell.
I mean, there has been concern that on your southern border that there are issues of the drug cartels perhaps partnering with international terrorists in order to smuggle people across the border, get people into the United States. But they don't appear to be coming in to conduct any missions of blowing anything up because there haven't been any.
Well, that's kind of like saying, true, there has not been a terrorist attack, but there was actually an attempt, a failed attempt in October of 2011. There was an attempt on the Saudi ambassador Abu Jaber. And that was done by a local Iranian in Texas that was working through the Quds Force, which is the feared paramilitary arm of the Revolutionary Guards of Iran, that was looking to hire a local Las Zetas leader, which is one of the biggest drug cartels in Mexico. So there was a real attempt. It got thwarted, and that's kudos to our intelligence and law enforcement officials that have been able to thwart a lot of attacks. But I would say, there's a lot of talk in D.C. about how Hezbollah, they're primarily a fundraising organization in the Western Hemisphere. They don't necessarily do attacks. But that's like saying a nonprofit is just a fundraising entity. I mean, yes, they do raise money, but they have a purpose. They have a mission.
And it's to send money back in order to...
It sends money back to the Middle East, but their mission is global, and they have a global presence.
I mean, the IRA did that for years, fundraising in Boston and New York. So did the other side, the UVF and so on. And horrible devastation caused throughout Ireland, often with money raised here in Canada or in the United States. So, I mean, there is an impact. We opened mentioning China, and specifically CSIS Director Richard Fadden, and I think he has raised the alarm quite responsibly, but he was denounced for it. There's a political game that gets played, and I'm sure it happens in Washington as well, where somebody says, there's a problem here, and let's discuss this. And then it turns into charges of racism, bigotry, you can't say that. Are politicians seriously that daft, or are they just playing games?
Well, I think there's part of it, some of it has to do with maybe mutually shared interests. I mean, China, on the United States' behalf, China does loan us a lot of money. And so we have to be careful what we say and what we do with our benefactor. That said, China is a concern geopolitically. I mean, they are a geopolitical actor. Their ambitions...
And there's no question that they're spying all over the place. They're conducting cyber attacks.
I think in the U.S. they're probably ranked up number two country with most spies, biggest espionage activity, particularly on the cyber front in the United States. And I'm sure in Canada's very much no different. They have a presence. They're very capable on espionage, and they've been utilizing that asset for quite a while.
Okay. I think that too often people just think of spies and they think of James Bond movies, and they think it's far-fetched. Now, I love James Bond movies, but the reality is spying is often much more boring, much more pedestrian. It can be just stealing secrets and passing them along through small-time people. We had a Navy officer recently charged, confessed, convicted of espionage in this country, was selling secrets to the Russian at apparently a very low price, which was the shocking part to me. How do you open up the public's eyes to what's going on and the fact that there are threats?
Well, espionage is interesting because espionage is actually a long-term, generally a long-term effort. It's never, I mean, there's sometimes, in combat environments, you might have what's called a spot reportable type action, which is something you look for information pertaining to a particular action on a mission at that moment. But generally, geopolitical espionage or espionage in general is a long-term action, and the Chinese are thinking long-term. They put people into different positions that can have access and knowledge on things that are critical to U.S. national security, Canadian national security, and it's just general overall security in the hemisphere. And they place these agents to carefully get information over the long term. So I think that's something that definitely has to be on the radar for both our countries. And not to mention, for the general public, I think just knowing that this is kind of an omnipresent thing. As if China comes involved, this is just something that comes with the package.
But it's interesting you say that, trying to put people of influence in. That claim's been made against all kinds of organizations and all kinds of groups. But the charge always comes back if you raise the issue of racism. And recently, I think one of your Congresswomen, Michelle Bachmann, and some of her colleagues experienced that. She raised issues about Muslim Brotherhood infiltration. I've heard about Muslim Brotherhood infiltration in our Foreign Affairs Department, the equivalent of your State Department. And it's a long-term game. Put people in, groom them, make sure that they have access to information that one day you may need. And the public and the media often seem to fall for the idea that if you raise concerns, it's some form of bigotry. How do you push back against that to educate people?
I think you just have to have a very detailed approach. I mean, a lot of times when people make accusations or they make statements or observations, they forget to leave the facts out. And honestly, the facts matter. And if you can talk about like the Muslim Brotherhood's influence in Congress or the Iranian influence in Congress, Iran has set up a slew of lobbies and different organizations that the Iranian-American Council that have been able to push policy in their direction. But if you could, good detailed investigative research that finds connections and patterns and trends and put that out to the public. Today we're going to have, at the conference, we're going to have a presentation by myself on Iranian presence and penetration in Latin America. Now, I'm not just going to go out and just make a bunch of blanket accusations. I have names, dates, locations, entities, and original documentation to back up what I'll be saying. And really it's an informational briefing. So I'm going to give out the information. It's up to the policymakers and those in attendance to make up their mind of what they think that's a threat or not.
All right, and thankfully a decreased Iranian presence here in Ottawa because we kicked them out. We don't want to hear from them anymore. Good speaking with you, Joseph. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, share your thoughts on national security at Facebook. Plenty more to come.